Hey guys, what's up? Nicky once again, and today we're going to be ranking every single weapon throughout the entire Twisted Metal franchise, from worst to best. So let's get right into it. The main reason I wanted to do this video is because I did some scouring on YouTube the other day and I couldn't find anybody that's created a definitive list of ranking from worst to best every single weapon pickup throughout the Twisted Metal franchise. I know some people have done tier lists in the past on what is the best weapon in the entire game series, but for me, I just wanted to give a definitive list of what I personally feel is the best and the worst weapons throughout all of the games. Obviously, this is my opinion, and I'm not going to sit here and state that these are factual, so if you have different opinions or a different ranking for your list, let me know in the comment section below, because I love to hear everybody's thoughts and opinions when it comes to the Twisted Metal franchise. When it comes to my ranking criteria, I'm only ranking these weapons based on pickups that you can find within the battlefield. So I'm not going to be including any special weapons because I've already made an entire video ranking all of these special weapons in Twisted Metal from worst to best. If you want to go check that out, I have a link to that in the description below. And I'm also not going to be including anything to do with the power-ups found in Twisted Metal head-on. Weapons that repeat in multiple titles will be ranked based on average stats. So what I mean by that is a lot of these weapons do carry over from one game to the next. So I'm going to be essentially combining all of them together and putting them as an average score on my list. Iconic weapons do get extra brownie points in my opinion. So just because something may be stronger than the other, I might give a leg up to one that's been around since the very beginning just because it's iconic. Skill gaps will be taken into account as well, so what that means is some weapons might be stronger than others, but if they take a sizable skill gap to learn and achieve successfully, that's actually going to dock some points because I want to be able to rank these based on just somebody picking up the game for the very first time and if a weapon is better than the other. And lastly, exploits for weapons will be counted towards my ranking. So what I mean by that is some weapons in this list can be exploited to be actually better than they are just by themselves, and yes, I will be taking that into account for this list. So with all that out of the way, let's start it out. At number 36, it's going to be the oil spill from Twisted Metal 1. Now in this list, you're going to notice a pretty obvious pattern that the Twisted Metal 1 weapons are going to be pretty much at the end of the list because let's face it, it was the very first game in the series, and they really came out of the gate just trying everything they could think of to see what would stick and what would be thrown into the trash can for later entries in the series. And sadly, a lot of the weapons in Twisted Metal 1 did fall pretty flat on their face, and that being the oil spill, which essentially is just taken straight out of James Bond. You just put a pile of oil behind your vehicle and hope that the enemy slips on it and goes flying into a wall. Because yes, in the original Twisted Metal 1 and 2 video games, you could take damage from running into walls, so I suppose in certain situations this could be useful, but for the most part, this oil spill essentially is useless, because most of the time it barely affects the AI, and yeah, you just lay it on the ground, run away, they run over it, and pretty much nothing happens. At number 35, we have tire spikes from Twisted Metal 1. Once again, another TM1 weapon, and this is another weapon that essentially does no damage whatsoever. All it really does is slows down the opponent for a few seconds. Basically useless in my opinion. It looks kind of neat, but it's just a bummer that it does absolutely no damage to the vehicle, it just slows them down. Coming in at number 34, we have catapults, once again from Twisted Metal 1. This, just like the previous two weapons, does no damage whatsoever to the enemy. All it really does is launch them into the air for a few seconds. This is honestly only useful for yourself if you want to try to get to a higher vantage point in the level, but in Twisted Metal 1 there isn't a whole lot of verticality to begin with, so once again the catapults come across as pretty useless most of the time. And coming in at 33, we have the rear flame attack from Twisted Metal 1. This was an interesting idea in concept, but in execution it's pretty terrible. Essentially, it's Thumper's special weapon, but it comes out of the back of the vehicle instead of the front, and it does pretty much half the amount of damage and only lasts about half the amount of time. So it's extremely difficult to actually land a hit on anybody, and even if you do, it's kind of useless to even attempt to use. And it only shows up in like one level in the entire game. So yeah, the rear flame, pretty useless, and that's why it's at 33. Moving on to 32, we have the speed missiles from Twisted Metal 3 and Twisted Metal 4. The speed missile first arrived in TM3, and it did come back in TM4 for some reason, but in both games, it's relatively useless. It's really weak. It only shoots straight in a line. It does have a little bit of a curve to it, or a homing capability, I should say, but for the most part, it barely moves at all, and it's just a straight shot. You can rapid fire these if you have a fast trigger finger, but that being said, they're so weak, they're essentially useless. They're just kind of like an added benefit to using with your machine guns. And yeah, in TM3 and 4, with the health pools as big as they are, speed missiles really stand out as the weakest, or one of the weakest missiles in the entire game, let alone the entire series. And moving on to 31, we have rain missiles from Twisted Metal 3 and Twisted Metal 4. The rain missile did change its appearance and the way it works in Twisted Metal 4 compared to 3, but it still is pretty terrible no matter which way you look at it. In Twisted Metal 3, it at least had a kind of cool design where it would shoot up into the air, and you had to shoot it out of the sky to land in a circular pattern around the enemy, hoping to burst them into flames. However, the flame damage is next to none, and even if you get a direct hit, it barely does any damage. So it's almost as weak as the speed missile, but I'm giving it a leg up just because it looks kind of neat, and I feel that it could have been done a lot better. And then in Twisted Metal 4, it doesn't look nearly as cool as in 3, and it does pretty much the same amount of damage, so it's relatively just as useless. And coming in at 30, we have the Rain 2 missile, found in only Twisted Metal 4. This one is very interesting to me. I don't know why we got 2 rain missiles in TM4 and both of them are pretty terrible. This one at least is pretty neat in the sense that it flies up in the air, it shoots out multiple fireballs, and it homes in on the opponent. But that's only if it actually attacks and hits the opponent. 99% of the time, it's going to miss every single missile, even if the opponent is frozen in place. It is absolutely horrible in its seeking properties for no reason whatsoever, so it pretty much does no damage almost every single time. But I did put it a leg up above the previous rain missile, mainly because if, by some freak miracle, you get a hit on an opponent with the Rain 2, it can do a decent amount of flame damage, which is cool to see. Coming in at 29, we have the landmines from Twisted Metal 1. Now these aren't necessarily bad or weak per se, and they can get an enemy off your tail if they're driving behind you, but they're just kind of boring. They're essentially just a landmine that you lay behind you, and this ended up actually just becoming a special weapon that you could use throughout the rest of the series in every single Twisted Metal after TM1, where it wasn't a pickup anymore, it was just a special ability that you would type in on the D-pad. And I think that was the smartest move because, again, they don't do a whole lot of damage, but they are pretty useful if you want to get somebody off your tail. It's just kind of a bummer that they take up an inventory slot in your inventory in Twisted Metal 1, so that's why I think 29 is a fair placement. Moving on to 28, we have the Roman Candles from Twisted Metal Small Brawl. This was the only new weapon implemented in Small Brawl, and even though I personally have a soft spot for the Roman Candles, I can understand why a lot of people crap on these and don't like to use them. They're essentially a new age version of the speed missile from 3 and 4, but at least they actually do a little bit of damage if you can rapid fire them enough. Not only that, but they have a pretty good range as well because they shoot in an arcing fashion, so they don't just go straight out in front of you like a power missile. You can actually get some decent damage on boss battles, and that's why I'm not like a total hater of the Roman Candles, but I do feel that they could have been a little bit stronger, and they're not always the most accurate when you're going against smaller enemies. Coming in at 27, we have the Freeze Missile from Twisted Metal 1. Yes, you heard me right, this is an actual pickup weapon. It's not actually a special ability that you type in with your D-pad, like we've come to know and love with every other game in the series, but in the very first game, it was a pickup that you got on the battlefield, and it just was a regular missile. Now, the reason this is not higher up on the list, because let's face it, a freeze missile is pretty good, and it does help a lot in most situations. The reason it's not higher on the list is because it only shoots straight in a line. It doesn't home in on the opponent, so it actually misses half the time in Twisted Metal 1, which is a big bummer. Not only that, but it doesn't last very long, and as soon as you do any type of damage to an enemy, they unfreeze. It can drive away immediately, making them kind of useless in a way. But if you're going against Darkseid, you've definitely seen the advantages of what freeze missiles can actually do, and that's why I feel 27 is a fair placement for it. And coming in at number 26, we have the MIRV, or the MERV from Twisted Metal 4. It was the first time we saw this weapon, and it sadly was the last time. I kind of wish that in a future game we would have seen a new version of the MERV come back, because it is a really unique idea, and it does work pretty well. I like the idea that it shoots up into the sky and multiple green missiles come out of it, homing down onto the enemy in front of you. Now, the major downside of the MERV is you can only use it in very select spaces within the game, because if there's any roof above you or any skybox or anything like a death plane, the MERV will run into it immediately and it won't be able to shoot out its missiles, basically doing no damage. So it is kind of a bummer. In most cases you can't really use it, but once you can, it does do a decent amount of damage if you can get every missile to hit the character. So I give them credit for trying something new and being innovative. I just wish it did a little bit more damage and that you could have used it in more situations within the game. And coming in at number 25, we have the tried and true fire missile. I know some people might be kind of upset that this is not higher on the list, but I think you'll understand why. The fire missile is exactly as it's titled. It's just a generic missile. There's really nothing special about it. It homes in a little bit on the opponent and it does a decent amount of damage. It's been in the Twisted Metal series ever since the very first game, and it's been in every game since. It has a special place in my heart, of course. It is very iconic, but you can't hide away from the fact that it doesn't do a whole lot of damage, and the homing capabilities have never been that great. So you end up just spamming the heck out of these most of the time, and you're only going to be able to hit your enemy maybe 40% of the time. So the fire missile is decent, but it's definitely not that great. So I think 25 is a fair placement. And at 24, we have the environmental attack. This was found in Twisted Metal Black, Head-On, and Small Brawl. Now, the reason I'm putting this into one category and not separating all the different environmental attacks is mainly because there are some other environmental attacks I am adding on this list that actually have their own name. However, there is actual weapons throughout these games that are just straight up called environmental attacks, and that's why I'm putting them all into this one spot. They don't do a whole lot of damage, but they are really cool and they are fun to use when you can use them to your disposal, such as in Small Brawl, you have the grinder in Meet Your Maker that can grind up people in one hit. You have the volcano that you can erupt on the mini golf level. You have the fireworks that can fly out at you on the bridge on the Treetop Rumble level. The list goes on with environmentals. And then of course in Twisted Metal Black, you have the lightning attacks in the environmentals, as well as in Twisted Metal Head-On, you have some other lightning attacks, and you have some rockets that can shoot on some levels. There's a ton of different things and variants that happen within the environmental attacks, but none of them are extremely overpowered or do a lot of damage, so that's why I feel 24 is a fair placement for this. They're just kind of fun to use, but in all, you can kind of miss them entirely and you're not going to actually get any major benefit from using them throughout your tournament. And at number 23, we have the Swarmer missiles. These were first introduced in Twisted Metal Head-On and then brought back in 2012. The Swarmer missile essentially is just a skill shot weapon that you hold down for a certain amount of time, and as long as somebody is within the lock-in window, you will get every single weapon to hit that opponent as long as nothing gets in between you. It does a decent amount of damage in both Head-On and 2012, but I will say the Head-On version is much more stronger. It just kind of feels overpowered in certain ways, and that's why I feel putting it at 23 is a fair spot. But I'm also not putting it higher on the list, mainly because it is a skill shot weapon that involves holding down a button for a long period of time and hoping that your enemy stays within the box before you have to let go. Because 9 times out of 10, at least half of the missiles are going to hit the ground or hit a wall, or something's going to happen where not every single one's going to be able to hit that opponent that you're currently aiming at. And they made it even worse for some reason in Twisted Metal 2012. So if the accuracy was a lot better, this would be much higher on the list. Because the accuracy is pretty mid, I think 23 is fair. Coming at 22, we have the rear fire in Twisted Metal 1. Once again, just like the freeze missile pickup, they also had a rear fire pickup. Literally, as it stated, it's a weapon that you pick up. It can only be shot behind you. So just like in future iterations of Twisted Metal, we were able to get a rear attack being a input that we put in the D-pad. In the very first game, we had none of that, so we had to use it as a pickup. It honestly would have been probably lower on this list if it wasn't for how much damage this actually does. It's extremely useful throughout my playthroughs of Twisted Metal 1, and I use it all the time. It's just really nice to be able to get people off your back without having just to lay a mine behind you and hope the enemies run into you, because the rear fire actually does have homing capabilities, and it does a decent amount of damage. I believe it does the same amount of damage as a homing missile in the game, so yeah, rear fires are pretty damn good. But it's not higher on this list because it still technically is something that could have just been a special weapon that we typed into our D-pad, and sadly it takes up a spot in your inventory, so I just feel like it shouldn't be any higher than 22. And moving on to 21, we have the Mortar from Twisted Metal 3 and Twisted Metal 4. The Mortar was introduced in TM3, and the final game that it showed up in was TM4. Essentially, it was a power missile that just had an arc to it, or it shot up into the sky and came down onto your opponent in front of you. I thought this was a really unique and cool weapon, and it's a lot of fun to use if you're able to get up close and personal with your opponents. However, the biggest downside of the Mortar is it can do a lot of damage to yourself. A lot of people probably don't use it for that very reason, and not only that, but it's very inaccurate if you're not just trying to run up to somebody and use it at point blank range. So the Mortar had some cool ideas. It does a decent amount of damage if you get a direct hit, but the fact that it has such a poor amount of accuracy and the fact that it can do a lot of damage to yourself, I'm putting it at 21. And moving on to the top 20, we have the Reticle from Twisted Metal Black. Now obviously this one could have been much higher on the list because it does a massive amount of damage if you can get every single weapon to hit the character within the reticle. However, the biggest downside of the reticle is how long it takes to charge up to get every single weapon to hit a character. But not only that, but even if you can get it to charge up all the way and get every single missile to shoot at a character, it's extremely rare to have every single one actually reach the enemy before they blow up. So it's just one of those situations where the skill gap is just so high on the reticle that I have to lower it down on this list. And even though it is very strong and I do really like using it, I'm putting it at number 20. Coming in at number 19, we have the Freeze Remote Bomb from Twisted Metal 4. This was a brand new weapon to the series in TM4 and surprisingly never came back, mainly because it's probably just overpowered. So essentially it's a remote bomb that you leave behind you and you can detonate it from any distance whenever you like. And instead of doing any damage, it actually just does a freeze blast, so you can freeze as many opponents as you like as long as they're in the vicinity of the bomb. You can use this to also cheese certain enemies on certain levels to have them fall to their death, which is always hilarious, and it does come in handy for certain combos. Now obviously it doesn't do any damage or anything like that, so that's why it's not higher on this list, but it does come in handy for many situations, and that's why I feel 19 is probably a fair spot for it. And moving on to number 18, we have the gas cans found in Twisted Metal Black and Twisted Metal Lost. Essentially the gas can was the replacement for the napalm, so I could have probably just put this with the napalm that's coming up later on the list, but I felt I should separate it since it is a different name altogether. And the gas can is really nice and it does do a decent amount of damage if you can get direct hits, but the biggest problem with the gas can is just the skill gap needed to get direct hits. So if it wasn't for the big skill gap, it would be higher on this list, but because of that, I think 18 is a fair placement. And coming in at 17, we have the Ricochet. Now this is found in almost every single game in this series, and that's why I'm putting them all into one spot here. There are some games where the Ricochet is much better than others, mainly because, for instance, in Twisted Metal Black, if you hit it off one wall and get a hit afterward, you get double or triple, I don't remember which one it is, but you get a ton of extra damage compared to just hit somebody straight on with it. And I always thought that was a really cool aspect to the Ricochet, and it always made it very fun to try to get these bank shots on people, and I absolutely love using it in every single game that it showed up in. So the Ricochet is very fun, it's very unique. The only major downside of the Ricochet is one, the skill gap of getting those bank shots, and also two, you can do a ton of damage to yourself if you leave them bouncing around the level. In every single iteration of the ricochet, it can do damage to yourself, so that's why I feel 17 is a fair placement. And moving on to 16, we have the tried and true homing missile. The reason that this one is much higher on the list compared to the fire missile is because the homing missile actually did almost double the amount of damage as the fire missile in the first 4 titles of the series, believe it or not. I actually didn't even realize this until playing the games more recently, how much damage the homing missiles actually do compared to fire missiles. And not only that, but just like the name implies, they are the best homing missile in the entire game. So you're pretty much going to hit the opponent almost every single time unless a wall or something happens in between you and the opponent. So really the only downside of the homing missile is that it's just not that strong. It is stronger than the fire missiles, but it's obviously going to be weaker than a power missile or anything else. So that's why I feel 16 is a very fair placement for the homing missile. And at number 15, we have the sniper rifle from Twisted Metal 2012. Now this was obviously a very jump the shark moment for Twisted Metal. I don't think sniper rifle should ever come back if we ever get a new game in the series, but it was interesting and I give them credit for trying something new. And yes, if you do hold out long enough with the sniper rifle, you can get a one-shot kill, and it is very satisfying, if not pretty bullshit when it comes to multiplayer settings. But the biggest issue with the sniper rifle obviously is the skill gap of having to stay in place for a very long period of time and locked in on one character at a time before you can get a one-shot kill. But it is pretty high on this list, mainly because you can do a decent amount of damage with it, even if you don't get it all the way down to the one-shot. So the sniper rifle is very useful because you can shoot anybody at any range as long as they're within your sights. It's just, yeah, the skill gap of having to sit there for so long does bring it down, but I think 15 is a fair placement. And at 14, we have the Stalker Missile from Twisted Metal 2012. The Stalker Missile essentially is just kind of a new age version of the Power Missile, but instead of just being a straight shot, you can hold down on it and let it charge up, and as long as somebody's in front of you, it will home in on the opponent, doing a pretty decent amount of damage. But the main reason it's not higher on this list is just because it's kind of annoying having to hold down and charge up this weapon every single time you use it, when I could just straight shot somebody with a Power Missile. And at 13, we have the Zoomy Missile from Twisted Metal Black and Twisted Metal Lost. The Zoomy attack is just a barrage of 10 missiles that shoot out in a spiral pattern and do a decent amount of damage if every single missile hits the character in front of you. I always thought the Zoomy was a lot of fun to use. I really don't have any issues with it. Other than that, I feel it could do a little extra damage compared to what you actually get once every single weapon hits somebody, because it is kind of difficult to do. But with all that being said, it's still a very useful weapon. It's a lot of fun to use and it looks really cool. So 13 it is. And number 12, we have the Shotgun from Twisted Metal 2012. Just like the sniper rifle, I always felt like the shotgun probably could have been in any single game up until this point, but I understand why it wasn't, because the shotgun is pretty busted in 2012. Almost every single time you're near somebody, if you have a shotgun, you're going to do a devastating amount of damage, and it's really satisfying to get that final kill shot with a shotgun at point blank range. So yeah, it's pretty damn good. The only major downside obviously is the range. You have to be really up close with your opponent. If you're too far away, or if you're even medium distance away from somebody, it's relatively useless. And number 11, we have the Auto Lob from Twisted Metal 4. Now this one I've always praised as one of the coolest weapons in the entire series, and I still stand by that. I think the design of it is really neat. I definitely feel it could have been a special weapon in Twisted Metal 4, let alone just a random pickup. But not only does it look super cool, but it does a devastating amount of damage if you can get it to hit every single one on a frozen opponent. The only reason it's not higher on this list is just because of the fact there's just better weapons in the series. But yeah, the Auto Lob is still amazing, but the only real downside to it is just that it's not the most accurate weapon. Even if you have frozen opponents in front of you, sometimes half of the missiles will miss, thus not doing as much damage as it should have. Moving on to number 10, we have the SAT, or Satellite, from Twisted Metal Black and Twisted Metal Lost. The Satellite, just like the Reticle, is a skill shot weapon where you shoot up this missile into the air, you have a little grid on the floor, and you're trying to keep the enemy within that grid before it comes crashing down to the floor, doing a massive amount of damage. This one is extremely fun to use because you have a different way to go about it every single time you use it. Yes, you can shoot it up in the air and wait for it to come down and get the most amount of damage every single time. Or if you just want to try to get somebody immediately, you can hit them with less damage, but every single time you're going to get a hit by just having it come down immediately. It's always very fun to use the satellite, and I wish it would have came back in more iterations of the games. But that being said, the major downside to it is just the skill gap of having to be so close to the enemy and hoping to get the max amount of damage by waiting for the missiles to come down out of the sky and landing on the opponent in front of you by keeping them in your sights. Especially in a very fast-paced game like Twisted Metal Black, it's not the easiest thing to do. And moving on to number 9, we have the Remote Bomb. Also, I'm going to include the RC Bomb from 2012 in this list. The Remote Bomb is iconic. It's the main weapon we use in Twisted Metal 2012 to detonate the Eiffel Tower, or really any other destructible environment within the entire series. It's also extremely useful if you want to get somebody through a teleporter to do extra damage, or to get somebody off your tail. And not only that, but the Remote Bomb throughout the entire series has always done a massive amount of damage if you can get direct hits with it, and it's always just a lot of fun to leave behind and blow somebody up in your rearview mirror. The only reason it's not higher on this list is mainly because of just how different it is in every single iteration of Twisted Metal. Sometimes the Remote Bomb is absolutely busted, like in Twisted Metal 2, and other times it's kind of straight up useless, like in Twisted Metal 4. So it really just comes down to which game you're playing, in which one is going to be a better version of the Remote Bomb. But the fact that it's stayed tried and true throughout the entire series and it's still an iconic weapon to use at your disposal is the reason I feel number 9 is a fair placement for it. And at number 8, speaking of iconic missiles, we have the Power Missile. Now this is the original skill shot weapon found in the very first Twisted Metal, and it's just a straight tried and true shot. It's no homing capabilities, but it does a devastating amount of damage if you can get a direct hit with it. They're a lot of fun to use, and they've always been a great weapon to have at your disposal, especially to save up for boss fights. The game that I feel the Power Missile is the strongest in is gotta be Twisted Metal Small Brawl. For some reason, the Power Missile just hits the hardest in that game, and they're always super satisfying to use against bosses. So yeah, Power Missile is by far one of my favorite weapons in the entire series, and that's why I feel having it at the top 10 is definitely warranted. But the only reason it's not any higher on the list is because it technically has a skill gap, and it isn't the strongest weapon in the entire series, which you'll definitely see very soon. At number 7, we have the Napalm, another very iconic weapon that's brought back into almost every single game in the entire series. It was first introduced in Twisted Metal 2, and it came out of the gate absolutely swinging. The Napalm is a super fun weapon of fire that just shoots out of the top of your vehicle. It has an arch that goes over into the opponent, and if you get a direct hit, it does a devastating amount of damage. It's also one of the best weapons to have for speedruns, because if you get up close and personal with somebody and you get direct hits with it, it's just insane how much you can obliterate opponents with. And not only that, but it leaves them on fire, doing extra fire damage. If I was to give one critique to the Napalm, it would be that it's kind of difficult to get direct hits with it most of the time, but it does have splash damage, so even if you miss, you can still do a little bit of damage and get some people on fire. And at number 6, we have the Lightning Attack. Now, I am technically separating this from the Environmental Attack from previous, but that's only because the Lightning Attack is extremely strong in games like Twisted Metal 3 and Twisted Metal 4. So it is found also in Twisted Metal 2, so I'm going to include that in this spot as well. But the lightning can be found on levels such as the North Pole in Twisted Metal 3 and in the Minions Maze of Twisted Metal 4. Obviously, it's found in more levels than that, but those are just the ones that come to mind every single time I think of this power-up, because it does a really good amount of damage, to the point of, as a kid, I remember just kind of sitting and waiting for it to respawn over and over and over again until you killed everybody in the level, just because of how strong the lightnings were. So yeah, I think number 6 is a very fair placement for the lightning pickups in those games. And coming in at number 5, we have the Radar from Twisted Metal 3. Now this is only found on one level in the game. It's on the Tokyo rooftops, and the radar is extremely strong. And the really cool thing about it is it actually aims at anybody who's closest to it, so it's constantly moving around and aiming at everybody, kind of like the Eye of Sauron. It's really creepy looking, and it's super devastating once you get direct hits. Not only that, but you can wait for people to bunch up in a corner, or you can use Club Kid Special to get everybody in a tornado. And if you can get everybody in one spot, you can pretty much hit everybody at once with one laser beam, and you can get triple, quadruple kills. It's ridiculously strong. And number 4, just like the radar, we have the Eye from Twisted Metal 3. This is only found on the Egypt level, and it's the only thing making this level worth playable. So the Eye essentially is just a giant laser that comes out of the pyramid, just like we got on the radar in Tokyo. But the only reason I'm putting this higher than the radar is mainly because of the fact you can get everybody bunched into the one hallway under the pyramid, and the laser will come through the pyramid and hit everybody at once, and you can get sometimes a triple kill, leading you to the next level, and it's very useful for speedrunning. So the Eye is extremely fun to use, it's really devastating, and it's just insane how strong it is. And coming in at number 3, we have the Proximity Mines from Twisted Metal 4. Now, I know this one might be a little bit of a bias on my side, but the reason this one is so high on the list is the fact that you can exploit these to no end. Yes, you can place as many as you want in one spot before they explode, as long as you get away in time. So, for instance, if you place 3 of these down in one spot after you go through a teleporter, if an enemy goes to the teleporter after you, they are going to be sent sky high, and pretty much every single time will die immediately. This can also be used, obviously, to cheese boss fights, which is absolutely hilarious. It can get you through a playthrough of Twisted Metal 4 in no time at all, making the Proximity Mines, in my personal opinion, one of the strongest weapons in the entire series. Not only that, but you can obviously just use them as they're intended, to just leave them behind you, to get people off your tail, or to leave them in certain areas, and they will never explode unless you shoot at them or somebody gets near them, which is very convenient. And coming in at number 2, we have the Spaceship pickup from Twisted Metal 3. Just like the Eye and the radar, this is only found at one level in the game, which is Hangar 18, which is personally one of my favorites in the entire series. But that being said, the Spaceship is an insanely strong lightning attack that can pretty much obliterate anybody in the game in one hit, as long as they're close enough to the Spaceship. And if you've watched any speedruns on Twisted Metal 3, it's by far the best part of the run. And it's so satisfying when you can get that special attack, use it, and kill everybody in one go. You can pretty much get through Hangar 18 within 15 seconds. It's just that devastating. So yeah, I feel number 2 as one of the strongest pickups in the entire game is a very fair placement. And coming in at number 1, what is the strongest or best weapon in the entire series of Twisted Metal, you may ask? Well, in my humble opinion, I think it's the Mega Guns pickup in Twisted Metal Black and Twisted Metal 2012. Now, don't get me wrong, I know this is technically just a glorified version of your machine guns that you have in every single game at your disposal at any time, but the Mega Guns are just insanely broken. In both Twisted Metal Black and 2012, as soon as you get these in your inventory, you can just shred the competition in seconds, no matter who you're going against, whether it's a boss battle or a regular character. Just getting those Mega Guns make you feel like a absolute badass. They are just so strong, and they shred through any amount of armor without a problem. So in my opinion, the Mega Guns are by far the strongest weapon in the game in both of these games, and I definitely think that they're also the most versatile. I know that technically you could say that the Spaceship from TM3 is a stronger pickup. I definitely agree with you. But the Mega Guns can be found on every single level of Twisted Metal Black and 2012, making them, again, way more versatile. You can also use them in different situations and against boss battles, which is really cool. Whereas the other weapons, like I talked about before, are only found on certain levels in one game. So yeah, the Mega Guns are just insanely busted, and I think they deserve their place at number 1 on this list. So that was my ranking from worst to best of every single weapon in the Twisted Metal franchise. Let me know in the comment section below if you agree with my list or if you disagree. That's totally fine. If you disagree, let me know what your list is in the comment section below from worst to best of every single weapon in the series, and I cannot wait to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. So with that, make sure to leave a like to show your support as always, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and we'll hopefully see you in the next one. Peace out, everybody.